And this next clip I'm about to show was from the SCAA's U.S. Barista Championship regional competition last month that was held in Santa Cruz, California. Let's watch that.
I think it's somewhat helpful. I don't think it's amazingly helpful yet because I actually have a real hard time with the fact that the real story of coffee has yet to be told in the sort of mainstream media. Frankly, I think in many cases they've dumbed it down and underestimated the audience. They're trying to make it too simple, and my preference would be that they were methodical in their explanations about what coffee is and what, if you want to call it third wave or specialty coffee is. It hasn't been explained very well to them, and there's never been good explanation about why they should pay more. We just say pay more because you should, versus really explaining why it costs more at the production level, costs more at the barista level, and all those things.
Now Doug's here, but that said, he also, his statements definitely are reflective of a lot of the sentiments that we've heard in the industry. And the quote from Doug in that clip being, "The real story of coffee has yet to be told." Now, Oliver, you touched on this a little bit during your video sort of segment.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit more.
To write a story for the publications for which I write, it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of money. And to do that, like to go to a country of origin and spend some time there, it takes a lot of money. And honestly, no story's ever been approved. They're not interested in spending that much money on these stories. And if they don't spend the money on the story won't be written, because in order to write the story, you have to have that information. So there was a story in the New Yorker that appeared on coffee, and Aida Batlle was the featured star of that. So the New Yorker decided that this was a story that was worth, however many thousands of dollars to go and fly the writer down there to do that. I've advocated that at the Times, and so far they're not interested. On the other hand, I'll get flown to a beach house to grill steak for Bon Appetit, because there is an interest in that story.
Tough life you live.
I'll get flown to Mexico to grill fish. Actually, I've done a lot of grilling stories in the last few years, and they're interested in those because they see the return on that, and they'll invest in these stories. Honestly, they're not interested right now, at least not interested in terms of the resources. They're interested in the topic, but they're not willing to budget it.
Should they be? To just play that sort of devil's advocate role, should they be interested?
I think that they should be, but I also understand their perspective. The publishing industry is under siege. It doesn't have a lot of money, so they're kind of doubling down on what they know and making sure that the boats stay afloat. I mean, that's what, to mix metaphors, that's what is going on in publishing right now. So, like, would they be really psyched to, spend 10 grand on a writer going to Africa and going to Central America and not spending time with you guys, like to go down there and actually talk to a lot of the growers, or rather to not spend time with the roasters, but to spend time with the growers and the exporters and the importers, with NGOs, with the government officials, to actually go and look at this story would be much more involved than I think what a lot of people realize. You over-report a story. You always know probably 5 to 10 times more than what appears in print. So to really go and report this, it would be a tremendous undertaking, and I say that there. But when I look at this story, like I look at it as being 1 to 3 months, to go and work on a story like that.
Yeah.
Is a publication going to pay for that, for one story? Right now, the answer is no.
Right.
That's the fact of it.
I don't know what Doug's talking about, because there have been a lot of coffee stories about why you should spend more on coffee. And they are, at the Seattle Times, they're interested in us going to Source, and they've sent many reporters to Source. I went last year and wrote about how climate change is affecting coffee farmers in Costa Rica. It's tragic. And I also wrote about, because I was down there and it is money to get there, I wrote a second story about direct trade, how Jim Stewart started doing direct trade back in the 70s and ended up marrying one of the women he bought coffee from, the owner of one of the estates. So
it happens.
we go to Source in Seattle because coffee is a big part of the business life in Seattle and what readers are interested in. But if you want, I think it would be interesting to write a story that just looks at why should people pay more than they used to for coffee. It would have many tentacles. It would be New Yorker size. It would involve a lot of travel. Maybe that one hasn't been done, but in bits and pieces, the story has been told, I think.
Yeah, I think that there's an impatience. I think that people expect for every story to kind of, package it all up and seal it all up. And at the times especially, I've tried to develop the story over time, to dole out the information like as I'm able to report it, and it's been a couple of years now. It's not just one story. I mean, there's no one story. So I'm trying to increase coverage and release coffee from, it's kind of on a novelty, it's on the novelty run still. At least it has been in the past. Like, is there a new machine? Is there a new animal, that shits out coffee? Like that's been what coffee stories have been. And so I've tried to pull it away from that to say, so this is good, and this is the reason why it's good, and you should try this if you happen to be around here. This is worth trying out. And to treat it like a culinary product. So there's really going to be one story that tells a story of coffee, but there's no one story that tells a story of food. That doesn't exist. There's a series of profiles of chefs, there's a series of articles about restaurants, of ingredients, of lots of things. And so you take all that in and you get a complete picture, but there's no like, yeah, have you read that food article? It really nails food. I understand food now. I didn't understand food before, but now that I've read this,
yeah, food's amazing.
Yeah, food's amazing.
Is our industry insecure? Is there like an inferiority complex in general? Like, what's this chip? Is it a demographic thing? What do you guys think?
That's getting pretty psychological about it. I mean, they do try to make it more complex than it is. Maybe that comes from insecurity. Really, I get the feeling sometimes when someone's pitching me something and they're listing off all of these farms I've never heard of and these people I've never heard of, I think they think I know what they're talking about and they're impressing me, and instead they're freaking me out. And I don't know why they're doing it. I don't know if they're insecure.
And Julie, is that the sort of thing that, I mean, more on the cafe sort of retail side? I mean, when you go into a cafe, do you feel like there's a lot of sort of esoteric language and terms?
There can be. That's why I gravitate towards the places filled with nice people making good coffee. But I was also thinking about the difference between print and new media. And the difference with some new media publications is where there's a lot of editors are a little bit more flexible about how the trip comes about. And then there's a lot of concern as to whether or not that's really a viable article. But most of the editors that I work for are pretty careful about it. And if we're offered a trip somewhere, the last thing we're going to do is take a free trip to the Caribbean because it's pretty. We're not going to take that trip because it's pretty and then just come up with a story. So sometimes we're offered things and we're offered invitations, but because it's a topic that we're interested in, then we are actually able to take that invitation and make it plain in the article, or just be very discerning and careful, because the last thing I'm going to do is, get an invitation to some exotic place to see the diaper factory and write about how cool the diapers are.
Sure.
So it's just interesting that then I've been able to travel to certain places. Like, the reason I met Colin in Dublin was because Jameson flew me out to meet with the master distiller.
Right.
What I'm going to do once I'm in Dublin and have a few hours of my own time is track down my coffee stories. So I end up having to put them in there with the other opportunities that I get, which I guess is a viable way of tracking down some good coffee shops in other parts of the world.